We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And we have with us now the #1 delegate in Virginia, Ken Plum. He is the delegate from the 36th District. He has been in the House of Delegates for, I think it's about 37 years, doing a great job for the people in Reston and in parts of Vienna. So, Ken, I want to welcome you here tonight to talk about this year's election. The entire House of Delegates is up, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, you don't have any opposition.
I have opposition in the form of apathy. In other words, if people decide not to vote, then it's not to my advantage, nor is it to the advantage of those who are running statewide and running then throughout the state. So I technically don't have a name next to mine on the ballot, but I run an aggressive campaign anyway. And I do that because it's really important during a campaign season to use this as an educational opportunity when people are paying attention. We hope they're paying attention, and we work hard to try to get more to pay attention in an election cycle, to get to know the issues. And then I explain to people that when you cast a vote for me, you cast a vote affirmatively that I'm doing what you want me to do. But it's important also, too, though, that not only on the ballot this year, in addition to your single House of Delegate member that you'll be voting on, would be those people who are running for Ralph Northam for the governor. You've just talked to Justin Fairfax for lieutenant governor, and of course our dear Attorney General Mark Herring. They all need to have votes. So I'm campaigning on behalf of civic engagement. And I will tell you, in my years of being involved in politics, I've never found a more receptive audience than I'm finding this year.
Really?
What's happening at a national level is percolating itself down. People have realized that, gee whiz, if it weren't for people voting differently, we got to have a whole different scenario.
That's true.
How different it would be in our country. And how troublesome it is, what's happening now as we degrade government, degrade policies that have been part of our government and so on. As we seem to say that lying is okay, lying is not okay. So those kind of things have energized people, and I hope that we will see, as I think we will, from various organizations about Million Moms March, the Indivisible groups that are organizing around the area, a higher level of participation than we may have seen in the past. It's time not only to elect good people to office, it's time to send a message.
Right.
Yeah.
And we are in Virginia in the position to do that this year because, except for New Jersey, which I guess isn't competitive, we're kind of the only game in town.
We're the only game in town in that regard, and I think a lot of people will read a lot into the outcomes of the Virginia election, how it is that the national is reflecting it. But also, too, I have to say that beyond that, we also have a number of challenges in Virginia. We've had an outstanding governor in Terry McAuliffe. We couldn't have a better governor than Terry McAuliffe. Ralph Northam is going to be equal to him for sure, but he's been great in the sense that some of the very conservative legislation that we've heard about in other states, in North Carolina, for example, the anti-LGBT bills and so on, those bills, many of them passed in Virginia. We didn't read about them, though, because Terry McAuliffe vetoed them.
Exactly.
And we had enough Democrats by the skin of our teeth to be able to sustain those vetoes in the House. And as a consequence, we were spared some of the adverse legislation that would come about if you had a different election outcome. So,
well, and you can look at, for people who say, oh, these are just social issues, you can look at what happened to North Carolina and say, no, they're not. They have a huge economic impact as the big companies and the soccer tournaments and the different sports people said, no, we're not going to come to North Carolina because of these bills that you have put in. And you're right, we've avoided that in Virginia.
And it's an economic issue. Some people call it a social issue, but it's a justice issue. It's about people being treated fairly and equitably by the law, by the courts, and within society. And so there's been a number of people in Virginia. We have a tattered history, Virginia, before the Civil War, was a slave-owning state big time. After that, we went through the Jim Crow era. The civil rights movement got rid of a lot of that. We find it creeping back in. Efforts, for example, to restrict people who go to the polls by limiting their ballot, making it complicated to register to vote and all that sort of stuff. And all this hocus pocus about somehow there's fraud that they're trying to prevent. It's not that. They're trying to hold them to power. Right. And that is very critically important. And I think more people are getting that message And again, I'm very hopeful that in November we're going to see a high voter turnout. And I hope our discussion tonight will excite people to say, yeah, I want to go participate. Yeah.
So you've been in the General Assembly now for the 37 years. So why do you want to do it again? I mean, this is a long time. You're in the minority.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to be done. I mean, the issues that I have worked on, one issue I'll just give you an illustration of that a lot of people now are aware of is gerrymandering and its effect on legislative outcomes. Whereas some groups say now the legislators pick their constituents rather than constituents picking their representative. I introduced the bill in 1982. It was the first redistricting bill introduced in Virginia, and one of the few ever introduced in the country at that point in time, because it came to my attention that although I was in the majority at that point, if we were to act, though, as the majority was tending to act at that point in terms of holding on to power, it would not be in our best long-term interest. And furthermore, it wasn't fair, and it wasn't just. So I put in one of the bills, and the Democrats kind of laughed me out of the room. I've introduced the bill now about 10 times since then. The Republicans laughed me out of the room. But something has happened that keeps me going, and that is that in this issue, One Virginia 2021, a group that's formed now statewide to say they want to get rid of what they're calling jury-rigged elections. Those where the election outcome is known by the way the lines are drawn. So I hope to be around to help conclude that fight. And that will have a long-term, I think, positive impact on the outcome of elections. First of all, you'll probably have more competitive elections. Those of us who stay in office without competition, that's not good for the system. It may be convenient for me, but long-term, it's not good for the system. And so that if we get rid of that, that'll be good. Secondly, I'm an educator, by background. I think the most important function really of government is education. So much springs out of that. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, and I'm sure if he were here today, he'd say all persons are created equal.
Right.
But when he came back to Virginia, one of the first things he did was to propose a system of public education. This was in about 1780 or so. Never came about. He had a grammar school plan in mind. He wanted the university. He got his university. The grammar schools never happened until after the Civil War. 1870, we got public schools in Virginia. And they're so critical to a system of government, a society, if you will, built around good information. And so we have, in the past several years, actually seen a decline in the amount of money going to public education. Now, some will say, oh my gosh, the dollars are more. The dollars are more, but there's more students.
Right.
So if you divide them out, you realize we're spending less on students than we did in 2008. That's not a good circumstance.
No.
I can't walk away from leaving that alone. Right. So there are a series of issues like that that continue to animate me, and as you can tell,
Yes,
still excite
me.
And they're not something that I deal with casually. I work on hard for all the time. And I now am in a position where my career as an educator, I retired in 1996. I do this now time and a half. It's a labor of love for me, and it's something that I think I can make a difference with. And the other thing I will tell you, if I can just keep right on talking for a minute.
Sure, go right ahead.
The other thing that excites me this year is the number of outstanding candidates who are running. We've had problems in the past recruiting candidates. The job doesn't pay very much. If you have a family and you have a regular work opportunity, it's hard to fit it in to be a delegate or a senator. But now we have competition throughout the state. And that has come about again because of what's happening nationally. People are saying we can no longer sit on the sidelines. So we've got to have these people who've been very conservative, who've carried the day on some of these bills and so on in the House. We've got to have them have a challenger and report back to the public. And so I see now in Fairfax and in fact throughout the state, some of the best qualified candidates that I can remember in a long time. They're right on the issues. They're animated to work hard. They're doing a great job of campaigning. So it's going to be exciting in Virginia this fall.
So do you think, because we have just that one vote ability to sustain vetoes. And we've got all of those new delegates, all of those, or delegate candidates, and all of those districts, the 17 districts that Hillary Clinton won that are held by Republicans.
Yep.
Are you pretty confident that we're going to pick up at least some of those seats?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to pick up seats. The question is how many. It would be great if we picked up 17, because then we'd be in the majority.
We'd be in the majority. That'd be
now,
amazing.
We got to be careful when in the majority, though, and not make the mistakes of the current majority.
True.
The current majority, when they were in the minority, had all kinds of complaints about the way the Democrats ran things, and when they took over, they took our mistakes and compounded them. So we got to be alert to do that. But I'm kind of confident that we're either going to move into the majority, or we're going to get so close that there's a recognition in another cycle or two. And I watched this when we went from Democratic control to Republican control, that the balance of power in the legislature gets so close, you have to start cooperating. You know, when you have a 66 to 34 majority, you don't have to do a lot of cooperating. But when the numbers get closer, cooperation increases. So we got to do our part. Northern Virginia, we can add to that 34 number, I'm confident. Yeah.
Well, and particularly because one of the incumbent Republicans retired, so we've got an open seat up here that I think people were not aware of. We've got a great candidate over there. So hopefully everybody will come out.
And a lot of people, I don't think, recognize that, particularly in Fairfax, there are some districts that have historically voted for Democrats for president, for governor, but when it gets down to the delegate line, they cast a vote another way. Sometimes I think that comes from the fact that we've had lack of challengers in the past, and sometimes I think it comes from the fact that there's a certain fatigue that sets in, that people get excited about presidential elections and so on, but when it comes around to that off year, like this year, they maybe decide to sit at home. In fact, the numbers show that, the numbers sit at home.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we do have some really amazing candidates. I went down to the Women's Summit in Leesburg probably about a month or so ago, and many of them were there. And there was a lot of excitement about the candidates. So hopefully we will be able to pull some of those together and get it done.
A number of issues that we face are women's kind of issues. These are women candidates, right?
Yeah,
that's a good combination. That's a good word. I'm extremely excited that we will come closer also to get fair representation of women in the legislature with this election cycle. So I think a lot of things are going for us. If we just get the word out, get people enthused about it, and I think the results will be good for us. So
how are you going to do that? Because Reston is such a massive Democratic base that, as you say, running with apathy against you is, if that vote gets depressed, that's not a good sign for the statewide people. Yeah, no, it's not. And that's why then again, you'll see me out doing things that every candidate does who has an opponent. I will be having meet and greets, and I will be having a number of community meetings. I coordinate heavily with the Indivisible group, but the point of all that is to get people knowledgeable of the fact November 7th there's an election, and also there's one August 29th, which I know you're going to talk about later. Talk about later?
Yep.
I want to thank you for coming in tonight and talking with us, Ken. We got a whole bunch of other stuff that we didn't even get to, but we'll get you back and talk some more. And I'm sure you'll beat the apathy because you've got great energy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation.
You're resigning.
Why? You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
Oh, I forgot. I'll do better. Please don't quit on me.
Don't let your heart quit on you. Get your uncontrolled high blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that.
Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
I'm putting that on my blog.
I just put it in mine.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia, and I'm Bettina Lawton. And you know, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And when we just left the last segment, I said I was going to have Ken Plum come on back, and he's here. And I'm so glad you could stay with us.
Thank you for having me back, because I wasn't finished all I wanted to say.
I
so
know
I'm glad
you weren't, and I'm so glad we can finish it, because I really think that I talk about how long you've been there, but it does give you that perspective, because you were in the majority, you're in the minority. We're looking at the effect of Donald Trump and being able to generate the enthusiasm. I think, now let me ask you this, because in the Republican primary, for governor, with Corey Stewart and Ed Gillespie, everybody thought Ed Gillespie was going to walk away with it. And Corey Stewart, who, as many of people will recall, was actually fired as Trump's campaign coordinator, whatever he's called here in Virginia, almost beat the moderate, middle-of-the-road Republican. Yep. So does that work in our favor? Do you think it incentivizes or makes the Republicans more... their enthusiasm gap going to narrow down because of that sort of scare, as people call it? What do you think the effect's going to be?
Well, we should never make the mistake of thinking that nobody likes Trump or Trump does everything wrong and so on. There are a number of people who approve of Trump. Now, granted, it's not a great number, right. But just as Donald Trump won enough states to get the Electoral College, didn't win Virginia, but Corey Stewart, as you say, almost knocked off the moderate, and Corey Stewart is a Trump-like guy. Yeah. So that's a lesson to, I think, voters to say, we can't sit back and now assume that because things be going this way nationally, that's going to affect the outcome of the elections in Virginia. It will affect the outcomes of elections in Virginia only if it means that we get out and vote. And so that's the message we have to carry to people, to have them say that if you're concerned about this conservative drift that you see among states, and it's not unique to Virginia, it's true across the border, the majority of state legislators are controlled by Republicans. But if you're interested in things like women's reproductive rights, then you've got to make your voice heard, or else these guys will end up winning the election. The way it works in the House of Delegates, it appears to me, with 100 members now of the House, there's the Democrats at the 34, and then if you talk about 34 Republicans as more moderate or centrist, there's then a smaller group of people who are the very conservative. And the way they control things is through the primary process. They challenge the moderates. So you have people that I'm convinced know better and think differently, voting these crazy conservative line because they're concerned about their job and losing in a conservative primary. Well, we got to have them get past that point. And like I say, when we move closer to the center and we closer to the even balance in the House, I think you'll see those moderates change their position. But it's far from a done deal. It happens only when people stay interested and stay excited and participate in the electoral process.
So tell me a little bit about these indivisible groups, and there's a bunch of them that I know that you were, and you mentioned the other one, the Virginia 2021. Right. And I saw on Facebook that you had gone to an indivisible meeting last week. So what are they all about? Are they actually going to be doing get out the vote things? I mean, what's going on there?
This group in Virginia, as is true throughout the country, and there are groups throughout the country that use this title, Indivisible, sprang up out of a shock that Donald Trump had won the election. My gosh, what can we do to protect the things that we cherish by way of our rights, and what can we do to keep that from happening in the future? And so a number of people who are not affiliated with a political party, are not affiliated with a political organization, League of Women Voters, or some nonprofit as well, have decided now to get themselves together for a purpose. And some of those early meetings were discussions about what can we do. And the group that I met with last week, for example, there were about more than 100, mostly women. I think it's like 95% or something women, were there. And my purpose was to introduce them to candidates in contested elections in Fairfax. And so we had a number of candidates come in, because I have said to people who live in my district, I need your vote, I want your vote, but in terms of your time, you need to help me get people like me elected so I can get my legislation passed for you by going into another delegate race and helping out. So just yesterday I went to a fundraiser for a delegate in another district and was happy to see that half the people there lived in my district.
All right.
That's the way it should work.
It is.
Because while I represent the 36th district and I work hard to try to understand the issues of importance to that district, I also represent a Commonwealth. I have to be concerned about what's happening throughout the state. And so it is important then that our voters see it that way too and realize that, Ken can't do it by himself. As hard as I work and as good as I am and all that good stuff, right. You can't do it by yourself. And so they can help out by joining in other campaigns in other delegate seats and not forgetting their good delegate, go vote for that good delegate, right. But then doing some work for other people. I can accomplish the task that I have when we get to 51. Mm-hmm. And you can help me by getting to 51, living in my district, but working in another delegate race. And when that happens, I think, again, you'll see the folks who form together this indivisible group finding a way in which they can contribute to the outcomes of government. And some of these folks I've talked to individually, they have, had careers, or they've raised families, or whatever their circumstance were, or they still have careers and still are raising families, but had never had a reason to get outside the home and do things. Now they see the reason, and they're determined. I can look in their face and see the determination. They're going to do some things. And so what we need to do is to work with them to understand what those might be. Another group, for example, is working on immigration. They're concerned about the way that the Trump administration is approaching the immigration issue. So they're organizing marches and they're writing letters. Another group is concerned with health and what's happening with our healthcare system. And so that's kind of how that group has come about. And for folks who are not yet involved, I'd invite you to Google Indivisible. Mm-hmm. There's one in Reston, and there's some others in Fairfax County that you could get involved with.
Well, one of the things that I do hope they do, because I know that there are some, and they do the marches and they do the letter writings and stuff. What I always say is, are you helping get people out to vote? Mm-hmm. Are you going to go door to door? Mm-hmm. Are you going to do the get out the vote efforts and work with? And the people who have the huge efforts are the normal folks, the parties, the unions, the people who've done this for years and years. Right. And I'm hoping that they will lend some of their energy to just the brute force necessary to say to people, there is an election this year. I know when I was going around for Ralph and Justin and canvassing for the primary, even just 2 weeks before the primary, there were people telling me they didn't know there was a primary.
Very common.
So we need to encourage these folks, and then they will also get the great sense and the great encouragement when the candidates win, because there's nothing quite like putting a lot of effort into something and you win, and that gives you the incentive to say, I'm going to continue doing this and trying to improve what's going on in my community. I think that's really an important
No question about it. And as an Obama volunteer, I can tell you that on election day, I visited some homes 3 times. It took me 3 knocks on the door throughout the day to finally find them at home to make sure they had voted.
They voted.
Because they had confirmed at the beginning that they were going to vote for Obama, and we were darn sure that they were going to get to the polls to do that. And so it's a very thorough process, and it requires a lot of follow-up. And the idea that you can somehow know, you can just mention this to somebody and it'll happen, that's not true. It takes a lot of follow-up, People have a lot of things on their minds. They got to get to the soccer match and all that. I understand all that. Right. And so we're about governance, and we know how to do that.
Well, let me talk for just a little bit in the last couple minutes that we have on some of the issues in Fairfax, because you're on the Transportation Committee, if I recall this correctly. And what are we looking at? I mean, we keep hearing from the federal people, there's going to be some massive infrastructure bill. We haven't seen anything yet, on anything actually. What are we doing at the state level to deal with it? I mean, we've got some major infrastructure issues.
2013, we passed a pretty significant bill that edged us forward. It was a meaningful bill. It's astonishing to me that in the current campaign, apparently, it's being pointed to as these guys were raising taxes. Actually, what these guys were doing was building roads, putting down new asphalt, making new intersections. That's what we were doing in 2013.
Creating some jobs.
Yeah, and creating some jobs in the process. So ultimately, there's going to have to be some investment made in infrastructure. I don't know how the Congress is going to get itself together to be able to do that, or the administration for that matter. But at the local level, and the state level I should say, we need to also recognize that we need to have a continuing investment. Infrastructure, two challenges. One, to keep together what we've got. You know, replacing bridges and so on is a massive task. A number of roads around here particularly cover many times more people than they were ever designed to cover. And so that we need to make sure that transportation continues to be a continuing commitment on the part of our gubernatorial candidates and on the part of our delegate candidates. And look at the way in which we can wisely use resources to get the greatest bang for the buck, if you will, of the dollars we spend.
So what do you think is going to happen with Metro? I know you're not on the Metro board, but it's a huge issue up in this area.
Yeah, we've put that off for years and years. One of the biggest problem with Metro now is related to its maintenance. It breaks down because it's traveled millions of miles. I mean, it's been a hugely successful system, and there's been a lot of talking around that. Well, we agreed to a new safety board, which the feds said we had to do, and the state legislature agreed to that, and now it's being in the process of being established so that then the federal money will start coming back. But ultimately, however, there's going to need to be a regional solution to funding Metro on a continuing basis. People need to be able to turn on the light switch and the lights come on, and that's reliability. You need to be able to go to the bus stop and the bus comes or the train comes. You got to have that reliability, or else people won't use the system. And a system-wide, or I should say region-wide, financial plan has to be put in place, and that means you got to get Maryland to agree with Virginia, to agree with District of Columbia. Not easy, but it was done. That's how we got the original system. We can do it again, but we got to have people with a positive attitude working towards it, and not people who want to go off to the side and play politics with it by attacking those who are trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me give you 30 seconds to talk about an issue that I know you are passionate about, and that's gun violence.
Oh yeah, it's a moral issue for me. I mean, no way can we justify the number of gun deaths we have in this country and in this state. I understand the Second Amendment and all that, but the thing being is, we have freedom of speech, but that doesn't say you have an unlimited amount of right to say what you say to me and so on.
Can't yell fire in the theater.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way it is too about being able to carry guns when you are known to be dangerous because you have a criminal record, or you're known to have a mental disorder. We need to have universal background checks. I've been introducing the bill and continue to introduce it. We need universal background checks that will make people safer. It's common sense.
It is common sense. Well, I want to thank you. I was so glad you could come back again,
thank you,
as we had promised, and talk about this election. November 7th, please get to the polls, take 5 people with you, all of whom will vote for the good people. So thank you so much for coming, Ken.
My pleasure.